I'm Bob Darrell. I'm an alcoholic. Through the grace of a God that I was afraid to believe in, that I have access to maintain in my life through a process outlined in a book entitled Alcoholics Anonymous, good sponsorship and the ability to remain sponsorable, and a persistent and consistent effort at trying to forget myself and help others. I haven't had a drink or any medication since October 31st, 1978, which is my personal best, actually. I'd like to welcome anybody that's new. Glad you're here. I sort of got a topic to talk about, but before I do that, I got to tell you how we're the same. If you're a chronic alcoholic, there's stuff wrong with you that's wrong with me too. And some of us keep it in the shade. We don't want to look at it. We hide it behind other problems. But one problem I have, and if you're a chronic alcoholic, you have this too, is that when I start to drink alcohol, regardless of what other problems I have, regardless if I have drug problems, regardless if I have depression problems, regardless if I have mental problems, employment problems, that social anxiety disorder problem, that, all that crap, whatever, when I drink alcohol, something happens to me that only happens to alcoholics. And I'm overcome with a feeling for more. I've always had that. And if you're an alcoholic, you know what it's like to swear to yourself, you're not going to get drunk tonight. You're only going to have 4. And then when you get to 3, you realize 4 is a bad number. I mean, you understand that. You keep moving the line, right? And you don't know it's a craving because it seems like you changed your mind. And I have that. And I have the weirdness of not only this abnormal reaction to alcohol, but I have an abnormal reaction to abstinence. That when I get sober, I ain't right, but I don't know it. I don't know that there's anything wrong with me, yet there's a whole bunch wrong with me. And I don't fit anywhere. I don't feel like people look. People seem to be connected and happy and just everything I'm not. So I get these horrible feelings of loneliness and separation when I get sober, like it's all of you and then there's me. And I'm restless. I'm irritable. Don't know I'm irritable. Don't want to be irritable. Irritable people irritate me. I am not irritable. But I'm gifted just to see the stupidity in people quickly. It's a gift, I guess. I don't know. Everywhere I look, I see stupid people. And I'm chronically malcontent. And all of that plus the obsessive self-concern that gets stuck up in here, and the obsessive self-focus that brings me so much up into here that I don't feel like I fit out here, because the truth is I don't even live out here. I live up here. And disconnected from life. And all of these things put together, these are all symptoms of untreated alcoholism. And they wear on me day in and day out, week in and week out, until what happens. The same thing happens to you that happens to me. And eventually I forget. They're gnawing at me. These emotions and crazy thoughts are gnawing at me to the point where I can't remember how I was crying and swearing to myself, I'll never pick that drink up again. And then the day comes where I can't grab that memory. All I can grab is a hope. A hope for a feeling and a sense of freedom that I'd found when I was a kid and I first started to drink alcohol. Where I could come out and play. Where I felt free. Where I felt okay. And alcohol truly was the most immediate and the most effective medicine for this thing called alcoholism I've ever found. And if it hadn't turned on me, I would have never gotten sober. But it's a progressive illness over any considerable period. Guys like me get worse, never better. So what's that mean? That means as time goes on, the magic effect diminishes and bleeds out. And the problems get more and more and more. And it's until the very end, there's no more fun left in it. I'm chasing the ghosts of parties past, and I can't catch them. And I tried to kill myself, 1978, because I was in a trap I couldn't spring. It's so funny, man. When I was standing on this bridge trying to get up enough courage to kill myself, if someone would have come along and said, Bob, you need to go back to AA, I think I would have probably said, you don't understand. I know it looks like it's alcoholism and it looks like alcohol is the problem, but it's not really. The problem is the way I feel and the way my mind works every time I get sober. And that's why I can't seem to stay sober. And I've been to the great psychiatrists. I even worked in the field for a while. My mother was a therapist. Matter of fact, the more I studied myself, the more lost and confused I became. I'll tell you, that's true. And I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I listen to people with no college degrees at all, like bartenders and car salesmen and carpenters, and they start telling me about them, and I sit there and find me. I go, oh my God, that's me. That's me. You introduced me to me in a way that the most educated psychiatrists and psychologists didn't have a shot, because they can't do what you can do. If you've worked the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you've trusted God for a period of time and practiced that through your actions, and you've cleaned house and you've gotten an awakening to who and what you are, and you became effective, then you can do something a guy with 5 doctorate degrees couldn't do. You can go to a place of genuineness within you. You will understand me in a way that even my mother and father couldn't understand me. And that is our gift. That's why we are able to help other alcoholics where no one else can. And 1978, after a failed suicide attempt, I ended up my last detox. I'd been in a lot of detoxes. I'd been to a lot of meetings of AA. Didn't like AA. It was offensive to me. All this happy, clappy, grateful for everything stuff. You know, when you're depressed, AA is offensive. I mean, it's horrible. You know, I got to go to meetings where I get my face rubbed in how wonderful you are. You know, oh my God. Oh. And I was an atheist, which... I wasn't really an atheist. I was afraid of God. I was afraid that if there really is a God, good for you, but you don't understand some of the things I've done. You don't understand how bad it is for me to try to be good, and how easy it is for me to be bad. You don't understand how I'm too stained. I'll never be good enough for God. Never. And I'm the kind of guy that if I just suspect you don't like me, I'm going to not like you first. Right? So I'm that way. I think God's not going to like me or warm up to me, so screw you. Right? And so I came here an atheist. But I was destroyed by this disease of almost over 6 years of relapsing, 6 years of institutions. The last 3 years homeless, living on the streets, which seemed to be immediate. Once my mother and father stopped trying to help me and I lost my last girlfriend, I slid into homelessness so quick it would make your head spin. Because I didn't know how propped up I was by people. And I lived on the streets for a while. People think that's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You know what's worse? Trying to impress those people. When you lose everything and you're all you have to do. I had one worry every day, and it was putting it together enough change to get a half gallon of Richard's Wild Irish Rose. My life was very simple. But the problem is that alcohol started to turn on me, and I couldn't get free anymore. And you know what late stage alcoholism drives guys like me to try to kill themselves, because my drinking is miserable. And my not drinking is miserable. and I'm in a trap I can't spring. And so I come into Alcoholics Anonymous in 1978. I was in this detox. I don't know what had happened to me, but I guess some of us we springboard out of that state of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization into an open-mindedness for the first time. And I sat in 150 meetings at least, but in 1978 it was the first time I could hear you. I think what had happened is I had enough of me crushed. See, I got this ego that you can't talk to me. You can't help me. I'm too full of me. But I was crushed, and I remember, I hope I never forget that experience of sitting when they finally got me off the IVs and everything, and gave me clothes to wear, going to the AA meetings in that place, and listening to some people in AA share, and one of them was the guy that would be my first sponsor. And I remember him telling his story, and something happened in me. And I'd heard other people tell their story, but I couldn't really hear them. I heard him. And I think sometimes we're brought together by divine appointment. And I could hear him. And as he was telling his story, I'm sitting there amazed, because I'm sitting there going, my God, I'm like that. And I didn't know if that was good news or bad news, but I was like, I had the identification. And I went up to him and I did something that was so out of character for me. I asked him if he would sponsor me. And I was so afraid that he was going to throw me away, because I would have thrown me away, because I was continually throwing me away, because I felt like a piece of crap. So I had to say to him, if you'll sponsor me, I'll do anything you ask me to do. Not knowing that they actually have a lot of things they want you to do here. I mean, a lot of things. And none of them seemed like a good idea. You know, like, oh my God, some of it was hideous. Like, he wanted me to turn myself in and offer to go to prison for 2 years. I thought, well, no, that's not good. And he said, no, you have to do that. And he got me to do some things that if I'd have been in my right mind, if I'd have been if I would have had any self-reliance, I would have never done that stuff. But my God, I love you for taking advantage of my brokenness to get me to take actions that I never would have taken if I could have still gotten to be full of myself. I wouldn't have done it. But there's some very gifted, intuitive lovers in Alcoholics Anonymous that watch the doors and spot guys like me. And you know how to talk to me in a way that you'll get me, because you put yourself in my shoes. And you talk to me, as it says in working with others, you talk to me the way you would like to be approached if the tables were turned, right? And so he started reaching me, and he got me take action. And you know, I think it was Ben asked me to try to tie this all into the three things that Dr. Bob said was that AA boiled down to. And his son brought me a bunch of his prescription pads, and he had written on one of his prescription pads, the prescription: trust God, clean house, help others. And he believed that all of Alcoholics Anonymous boils down to those three things. Well, so I come here, trusting God is like, I don't believe in God. I remember I was early in sobriety, and I got out of the treatment center, and I was going to a meeting, and a guy came up to me after the meeting, and he said, kid, you need to take step 3. And you know, the steps are on the wall in the Solano Club, and I look at the step, and I go, no, I can't do that, Joe. He said, why not? I said, because I don't believe in God. He said, you don't have to believe in God to take step 3. I said, Joe, look, it says came to believe in God as we understood him. I don't have any of that. He said, trust me, kid. He said, I'll tell you what, you turn your will and your life over this chair, and he pointed to a chair. I guarantee you an instant miracle. So I thought, okay, what the hell? I turned my will and my life over the chair, and Joe gets a big grin on his face and says, the miracle is your life's no longer in the hands of an idiot. I didn't even get mad. It was like, oh yeah. I mean, it made sense to me. because I was starting to wake up to the truth. And the truth is, for God's sakes, if anyone would have watched me the last couple years, as maybe your friends and family and loved ones have watched you, how could you come to any conclusion other than whoever's making decisions for Bob must be out to kill him? And you didn't introduce me to God. You first introduced me to the idiot. And the idiot brings out the need for a new manager, right? You got to get your life out of the hands of the idiot. And my sponsor had me reading page 60 through 63. And now, for the last 40 some years, I have the guys I sponsor read it. I have them change it. Read it in the first person, because it's written in the third person. And I don't know if everybody has this experience, but when you read something in the third person, it's about them, right? That we were alcoholic. Well, I'm not really part of the we. That we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. Good for you. That's a shame. So I have them read it in the first person, that I am alcoholic and I cannot manage my own life. Period. Doesn't say when you're drinking. See, that's the big fallacy, that we equate an unmanageable life to drinking. I don't know if this is true for everybody, but it's true for me. My life is more unmanageable when I get sober, because what's the most unmanageable stuff? It's the inside stuff. How I'm prone to fear and anxiety. At times, in early sobriety, my sponsor would have to talk me off the ledge, because I would be having panic attacks because I'm a thinker. You know what I mean? You leave me alone for an hour. What do you want to do when you have an hour free? Well, I'd like to ponder my life. I've never done that and spiraled upward. I always into the abyss, So I'm starting in this process, and had me read page 60 through 63, and I read it and I read it and I read it, and it wasn't about me, it was about you. And then the day came. And there's something magical that happens to guys like me when I'm in severe distress and I feel like I'm having an anxiety attack. And then you bring the awakening from the book to me. And that one day I read that after having one of the worst days. And it wasn't about you anymore, it was about me. And when you guys told me that selfishness and self-centeredness was the root of our troubles, I started to wake up to that. There's a description of Alcoholics Anonymous in the back of the book, in the medical view of alcoholism, which I think is the most pristine and almost perfect description of AA I've ever read anywhere. And it's not written by, or not coined by an alcoholic. It's by a doctor who was sent to AA to check us out by the American Medical Association. Because we were starting to get a lot of notoriety. I mean, we were up for the Lasker Award. We just had the article had come out a couple years before. Jack Alexander, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the National Council of Alcoholism had come about. I mean, we were on the radar in society. So the American Medical Society wanted to know, what the heck is this stuff? They sent this Dr. Baer to check us out. Went to a few meetings, read a little bit of our literature, and he said the most brilliant thing. He said, well, they're not crusaders, which is true, except there is a phase some of us go through. It's true for the most part. We're not crusaders. He said, we're not a temperance society. We're not fighting the bottle. We're fighting alcoholism. We don't care about the bottle. I have my daughters drink. I have a lot of friends that drink. I'm not fighting the bottle. This is not a sinful rebellion against sin. This is a rebellion against my reaction to alcohol, right? It's individual. And we're not a temperance society. We're people who know we must not drink. How many times did I have to hurt myself? How many times did I have to just have come out of blackouts just with shame and guilt and fear? before you get to that point where you start to connect the dots and realize, oh my God, this is happening about every time I drink. I must not drink. And then you go through that phase that I went through, and a lot of us go through, where you start swearing to yourself and meaning it with every fiber of your being, you're never going to drink again. And to realize horridly that 6 months or 3 months later, you're back at it again. It's frightening. We are people, he says, that realize that know that they must not drink. And so and then he talks about the solution, and it's beautiful. He says, so what they do is they throw themselves into helping others with similar problems, and in that atmosphere of a guy inconveniencing himself to help others and trying to forget about himself, in that atmosphere, the alcoholic often will overcome his excessive concentration upon himself. I remember the first time I ever read that, I thought, this doctor just came to a few meetings and saw that? I was sober many years before I started to realize that. I mean, like, that my whole problem is this obsessive concentration upon myself, this obsessive self-concern. And it's plagued me for my whole life. It plagued me before I ever picked up a drink. I heard a speaker one time who said his first drug of choice was other people's approval. I thought, I mean, I was obsessed with what people thought of me before I ever picked up a drink. I was anxious and worried about stuff before I ever picked up a drink. And when I found alcohol, I found medicine. That I have this obsessive concentration upon myself. And that's the nature of the beast. And so I come into Alcoholics Anonymous. My first sponsor was a service fanatic. He'd been delegate. He'd started the convention in AA in Vegas. He was like, he did the first H&I meetings in Vegas. I got him to sponsor me because he brought a meeting twice a week in the detox. This was before they had an H&I. They had a hospital and institution committee. He created one before it was even called that, because he knew something. He knew what Bill Wilson knew. He knew that his very life as an ex-problem drinker depended upon his constant thought of others. That helping other alcoholics and being a good Samaritan occasionally wasn't enough. He was an everyday member of Alcoholics Anonymous. His primary purpose was truly his primary purpose, and it was exemplary. He showed it in his actions every day. He was an all-in member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He used to show up twice a week at the detox. He showed up at a lot of stuff, committee meetings, all kinds of stuff. You can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. He showed up because his program was in his feet, and he was my great example, and he wanted me to start doing 12-step work right away. I mean, I wasn't even out of detox a week, and he's nudging me, pushing me. I want you to go back into the detox with me and the guys. I want you to sign up for the penitentiary meeting they're going to start. I want you to go to Reality House. I want you to get on the 12-step list. I want you to help people. I want you to help me. And he's like over the top with this stuff, you know. I mean, I reached into my bag of therapeutic tricks from when I was a counselor, and I said, well, don't you think I should work on me for a while? And he looked like he bit into a lemon, and he reared back and, work on you. You've done quite enough of that. Stop it. And when he said that, I didn't get mad. I thought it was right. I mean, I'd been Gestalt therapy, transactional analysis, trauma work. I did primal screaming. I mean, oh my God. I was in therapy with Ellis, who you had to be a senator or a rock star or a movie star to go to see Ellis. And I never got better. So when he said, you've done quite enough of that, I thought, man, I did. And I was tired. I was tired of trying to fix Bob. Because the more I tried to fix me, it seemed like the worse I got. I'd start examining myself and my child. Oh, I loved therapists that want you to look at your childhood. Because you know what, when I look back at my childhood, I only remember one thing clearly, and that's me, right? I can't tell you the struggles my mother and father had or my sister. It's all about me. I could tell you every time I imagined I was slighted. I could tell you I kept files in my head on that stuff. But to the rest of the world, I was asleep at the wheel. That I was even that selfish and self-centered back then, before I ever picked up a drink. I was that self-concerned, that self-obsessed. And I didn't know it. One of my favorite lines in the book is chapter 5. Wilson writes some things. I don't know if he was trying to be funny, but he's funny. He says, the alcoholic is an extreme. So this is not like a little bit. This is off the charts. We're extreme examples of self-will run riot. And then he says, this is what I think is funny. He says, though we usually don't think so. I've never been self-obsessed and in the middle of trying to get my way, in the middle of worrying about me, in the middle of wondering whether things are going to go good for Bob, in the middle of that, never stopped and thought, could I be an extreme example of self-will run riot? It never occurs to me. The greatest trick the ego ever does is convince you it's not there, or to convince you it's you, because it talks to you in your own voice, right? I don't know how this worrying mind of mine, I think it's me. It's not me. A guy in AA taught me that. I was having a panic attack, early sobriety. I had so many problems. None of them were occurring at the moment, but you know what I mean? I have a lot of problems that were coming at me. And this guy, I told him a whole litany of these problems. And he looks at me and he says, oh, you think you're your head, don't you? You think you're your mind. I went, well, yeah, it's my thoughts, my mind, my head, yeah. He said, that's not you. I said, no. He said, no, you're the idiot that listens to that crap. And which, if you get into meditation in step 11 and various approaches to that stuff, you really wake up to that, because that's not me. I'm the listener. I'm the one I'm the one that hears it. It's not me. I'm the observer. And God, Alcoholics Anonymous has woke me up to some stuff that I don't think I could have got it anywhere else. This whole thing about God. Truly, there's not an organization, a religion, there's not anywhere on the planet that could have taken a guy that was as afraid of God as I was, and God resistant as I was, and brought me to God, because you never told me I had to believe anything. You just wanted me to do what you do. And there's a great little paragraph in We Agnostics. It says, if you can do two things, if you could lay aside prejudice. Well, what is that? That implies a degree of self-abandonment and humility where you know the most important thing you would ever know. It's what the Buddhists call enlightenment. You know you don't know. And if you get to the point where you know you don't know, then there's no more debate with what people want. So my sponsor wanted me to pray when I was early sobriety. I tried to explain to him. I said, well, I don't believe in God. And he said, I didn't ask you to believe in God. I asked you to pray. And then I got on my high horse and said, well, if I pray and I don't believe in God, I'd be a hypocrite. And he said, oh, you've been a hypocrite all your life. Just do it. And you got me to take actions. And it didn't matter. You didn't care if I believed in this stuff or not. You didn't care. You just cared that I did it. And sometimes I look at Alcoholics Anonymous as like some kind of bizarre spiritual conga line. You know, you just get behind the guy in front of you. When he shakes his butt to the right, you shake your butt to the right. When he shakes it to the left, you shake it to the left. Just do what they do and you get what they get. And it's that simple. And you guys introduced me to my alcoholism. I didn't understand all the stories, the brilliant stories about the phenomenon of craving. The stories that when I would hear you talking about your experience with drinking, I'd sit there and I'd go, oh my God, that happened to me. Time and time again. All the times I swore I wasn't going to go too far, and I did. You introduced me to that. And I being involved in a lot of therapy, I thought when I worked in the field, it was at a time when it wasn't nature, it was nurture, right? And there was very common in the field of treating alcoholism and all kinds of stuff that you tried to tie it into something in your childhood, right? You drink the way you drink because you must have had a terrible childhood. Well, I have an allergy to cats. If I come over to your house and you have a bunch of cats, after a while I'm going to have to say, listen, I'm going to have to leave. My nose is starting to run, my eyes are watering, I'm going to get sick here, my chest's going to get a little tight. And nobody will say to you at that point, you must have had a terrible childhood. Nobody says that, right? Because alcoholism is independent of any of that stuff. There are people from amazing childhoods that are horrible, horrible alcoholics, and there's people that had the childhood of a bad episode of Criminal Minds, and they're not alcoholic. Because if you have the allergy, you have the allergy. And isn't it funny? And that's why I loved about therapy. I wanted to blame it on somebody. I wanted to tie it. Because, all right, I can admit I'm messed up here. But I want to make it someone else's fault. And you know something my first sponsor said, my second sponsor said, victims don't stay sober. We don't. And so you guys got me doing a fourth step. I did my first one back in the 70s. This sounds so weird today, because in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous today, worldwide, we have such a big book consciousness, but it wasn't always that way. I remember back in the 70s where if you ask an old timer, how do you do the fourth step, or where can I read about it? He'd send you to the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. He'd send you to a 12 by 12 study group to read the fourth chapter in that book. Nice book, great book. Helps. If you've already done the steps in the big book, it's a great book. But nobody even knew. I don't even think my first sponsor knew what pages the fourth step was on in the big book. And so I did my first one in the 70s. The way a lot of people, we just wrote our life story, very honest, all the shameful secrets, put it all down. And it was beneficial, but it was not transformational. And why do we want to do this? Why do we want to do it the way it's outlined in the book? Because that, over the test of time, seems to provide the greatest results and the greatest freedom. And I'm not doing a fourth step for information. I'm doing the fourth step for a change in perception. As I start to go down my judgment list of my resentments, and I start to realize, when you do This Was Our Course and look at these things from an entirely different angle, it was mind-blowing to me. Because I started to see how wrong I was about my mother and father. How wrong I was about my sister, about my exes, about the bosses. And it was embarrassing how much I tried to blame my life on others. And what becomes very apparent to some of us is if you send a CSI team into every problem area of my life, you're only going to find my DNA. I'm the guy. I'm the guy who, what's it say, made decisions based on self, which later placed me in that position to be hurt. Let me tell you something. If there's somebody walking around looking for someone to take advantage of, I will look at them and then try to fit myself to what they're looking for. You know? I'll put a target right here. Made decisions based on self, which later placed me in that position to be hurt. And I was amazed how true that was in my life. And why am I doing this? Why am I doing this house cleaning steps 4 through 9? So I can become good? Or so I can have knowledge? No, I'm trying to get rid of some stuff. I'm trying to get rid of the things that create the feeling of separation. My second sponsor's sponsor was a guy named Chuck, and Chuck used to say there was one problem and it contained all problems, and that's conscious and unconscious separation between me and you. And the alcoholism's a lonely business. Why we don't fit? Not really. Not the way other people appear to. The separation between me and you, between me and God. I've sponsored clergy who had tremendous faith in God, yet remained separate and couldn't access the grace and drank themselves to death. Because the problem is the separation. And at the core of that is selfishness and self-centeredness. I don't know it, but I got too much of me between me and you. I've watched people leave Alcoholics Anonymous because of selfishness and self-centeredness that they're not aware of. And you know how you leave? You're not really leaving. You're just noticing things about people, you know. It's just getting harder and harder to go to that group because, I don't know. It's not like it was in the old days. There's a lot of stupid people there today. You know what I mean? You leave Alcoholics Anonymous one judgment and one opinion at a time. And guys like me do that. And I've done that in my sobriety. And if you would have stopped and said, "Oh, that's ego, Bob." Oh, no, it's not. These people really are stupid. You know, I wouldn't have got it. I mean, because ego hides from me, and it's a hideous thing. But so I'm doing all this trusting God so that I don't have to act on my fears and I can live a more surrendered life. And I'm cleaning house because I got to clear out the stuff that's between me and God, and I got to clear out the stuff that's between me and you, and that is so essential. I think that for some of us, I've had guys that I sponsor that take this position. They want to take this position. They just don't understand they can't. Them and God want to be like this, but they want to think everybody else is messed up. They want to be separate from God's kids and yet be tied in with God. Right? I have not been able to do that. Because you can measure my distance from God by measuring my distance from you. You can measure my distance from the decision, carrying out the decision I made in step 3, by the amount of opinions in my life and the amount of judgments. Because opinions are symptomatic of the ego's bondage of me again. You know? You don't think when you're very opinionated, you don't think that's your soul, do you? It's my ego. And that's the thing I watch for. And so this process is all designed to do 2 things. It's designed to help me actually carry out the decision I made in step 3 so that I can trust God. And trusting God is a big deal here. One of the great directions Bill gives in step 11, I think, and I use this with everybody I sponsor gets this. We have this talk. It's the pause when agitated. One of the great directions. Because some of us, we don't pause when we're agitated. We accelerate when we're agitated. We attack when we're agitated. We explain or defend when we're agitated. And here's a crazy thing. I didn't know that excitement was a form of agitation, because excitement kind of feels good. I thought they were talking about agitation that feels bad. They're talking about disturbances in the lake of my soul. And I've gotten myself in trouble just as much from excitement as I have from anger or fear. You know, it's that kind of excitement where maybe you're single and you look across the room and, oh my God, she's my soulmate. And she just got out of detox. Amazing. I mean, oh my God. Oh my God. It's amazing. Right? And you get excited and you don't know. This is when you really pause. I have guys that they get like that. You won't see them for a month. I mean, they just, where'd they go? Well, he's in love. So I want to do this. I want to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And I think the Great Awakening in Alcoholics Anonymous is not based on knowledge. It's based on empathy and compassion. And the word compassion is something that, it's a word I didn't understand. I didn't know what it meant, but it comes from two Latin words, cum meaning with, and passio is the root word for pain. And when I started doing This Was Our Course in the resentment inventory, and I started putting myself in the shoes of everyone I judged so harshly and looking at it from their side of the street and through their eyes, what had happened between me and them, I started to get it. I started to wake up. I started to understand. I started to have this ability to sit with their pain, to have compassion. It's like, I really see you. I never saw you. You know what I see when I look at people usually? I see my explanation of you that grandizes me. But to really see you, see, God sees us. He sees the backstory. He sees your childhood. He sees your frustration. He sees your fear. So he's not mad at you. He gets it. But my ego only wants to see enough to grandize me so I could feel smugly superior. And to push through that. To see in you what God sees in you. And if just to the extent that I can do that, I don't have any, it reduces the separation between me and you. I've had people, I had a guy in my 11th year of sobriety that had an affair and ended up with my ex-wife. He had an affair. My 2-year-old daughter moved in with him. And when I was able to do that, what it says in This Was Our Course, and really put myself in his shoes, I got it. I know exactly what happened to him. I know exactly how his selfishness and self-centeredness can override his moral compass, as it has for all of us at times. You scare me. I believe in honesty, and I want to be honest with people. You scare me, I'm capable of lying to you. If I'm afraid of confrontation, if I'm afraid of what you're going to think of me, I am capable of lying to you. Now, I might have to come back and make amends. If I'm lonely enough, I'm empty enough, vacant enough, I'm capable of making all kinds of crazy decisions. I may regret them later. I may dislike Bob extremely for those things. But I'm capable. And one of the things that happens, and it's inadvertent, as I started to understand you through that process in the 4th step and take you off the hook and have a little compassion and understanding for you, funny thing happened. I'm a depressive, and I started being able to do that for me. It's like when you release the dogs of judgment, they always come back and bite the master. And when you release the dogs of understanding and compassion, it comes back on me also. And so there's a dynamic here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wish I could do better at this. I don't do very good sometimes. But as I perceive you, I perceive me. You want to know how I'm doing spiritually? You want to know how you're doing spiritually? Look around you. If you look around where you work, in your family, in your AA group, and all you see is people that are kind of like you, struggling with some of the things that you struggle with, but they're doing the best they can, and you feel proud of them, and if I could help you, I would, and you feel that understanding, compassion, you're doing pretty good spiritually. You look around you and you see stupid people, you're in trouble. I'm telling you, you're in trouble. And that is always true for me. Bill said in step 10 that it's a spiritual axiom. Which, if you ever took geometry, an axiom is something that's always true, true under all conditions. It's a spiritual axiom, Bob, that when you're disturbed at all, Bob, there's something wrong with you, Bob, because I am the source of the disturbance. I may try to imagine that you're the source, but you're not. I'm the source of the disturbance and the separation and the conflict. It's me. And I'm always the guy that has to change here. I remember back in the days when I was so convinced, I was a victim of that delusion it talks about in the book, that we could wrest happiness and satisfaction out of this world if we only manage well. I suffered from that into my sobriety. The idea, if I could just get things lined up, if I could just get you straightened out, then I'll be good. And sometimes I'll get things lined up, but they're never lined up quite good enough. Do you ever notice that? I'll get you straightened out, but I got to watch you all times because you'll go back. That you cannot fix an inside separation with outside stuff. You cannot fix a spiritual malady, an internal deal with outside stuff, no matter how. And some of us learn that the hard way. I had a friend, a guy, wasn't a close friend, but a guy I knew who 35, 40 years ago committed suicide in probably a $10 to $15 million house on the beach in California. He had everything. But no matter how good you get it out here, if it ain't no good in here, it's no good. And so, as my grand sponsor used to say, this is an inside job. I trust God. Why? Because if I'm trusting God, I'm not driven by fear. And the fear is a big driving force in my life. And trusting God's hard. And I want to talk just a minute about this. I think it's the longer I'm sober, the more important trusting God is. And it's not a feeling. Trust is not a feeling. If you're waiting for the feeling, you're going to wait a long time. It's action. It's the way you show up. As a friend of mine used to talk about, it's the angle of approach. I'm scared to death. I'm scared to death. I can't stop worrying about certain situations in my life. I can't stop. But if I trust God, then I will show up like someone would show up who really trusts God. And what happens if you do that long enough, and you do it over the years continually, you start to know something from your experience, which is the only thing here of any value, is your experience. You start to know that God really is trustworthy. But you'll never find that out until you trust Him. And trusting Him especially in difficult situations. And the more I trust God, the more trustworthy He becomes. And I think that becomes the core of this thing in my life that holds me up. This knowledge that is based on my experience. That no matter what problems occur, the power behind me is stronger than the obstacles before me. And you can just settle into that. And you can relax. It's almost like relaxing in the hand of God. But you never find that out until you've been under stressful, terrifying situations and been forced to act like someone. I'll tell you, the first time I ever did it, my sponsor, I'd been sentenced to 2 years in prison in Pennsylvania. I ran. Here I am in Nevada. And he made me contact my PO and offer to go do 2 years in prison. Oh my God. I thought, I've got to get another sponsor. This is no good. This is bad. But he convinced me I had to do it or I wouldn't stay sober, looking over my shoulder. And I did it, and he said, you're going to have to trust God, and I'm really trusting Him and the God that works through my sponsor. And I followed his directions, and I didn't have to go through the 2 years. I got my case transferred to Las Vegas. I got to complete, it was in a year, I got to complete everything the courts wanted me to do. I was off the hook, no felony conviction, misdemeanor time served. And years later, when I went to get one of the most prestigious licenses in the world, a gaming license to be an owner-operator of gaming facilities in Las Vegas, I almost started crying as I stood before that board, because I knew that the only reason I was here is that Alcoholics Anonymous has pushed me down roads that I would never have gone down on my own. Never. And thank God for the people in AA that cared more about me and my life and my spiritual condition than anything. It was like you were harsh to me. But at the same time, I knew you loved me and I knew I was important to you. I knew you had my best interest at heart. There was not one thing in Alcoholics Anonymous I was given to do that's ever hurt me. Not one. Doesn't mean there isn't things in AA that you go, oh, I don't want to do that. A lot of AA is inconvenient. There's a tremendous spiritual coinage in inconvenient actions. And so we do all of this so that we can carry out that decision in step 3 and so we can grow in understanding and effectiveness. When I said in the 7th step prayer, when I said to God, I want you to remove every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness. That's kind of what we're doing here. I'm claiming a purpose that's greater than Bob. A purpose that's more important than Bob. And that's to help God's kids. And my experience over the years, and I do a lot of 12-step work. I do a lot of panels and institutions. Seems like God takes good care of His servants. He takes real good care. Because the 3rd step promises, Bob, you have a new employer. He's all powerful. You don't have to worry about nothing. He'll give you everything you need. If you can do 2 things, and that's stay close to Him, which means I got to trust Him even when I'm afraid, and perform His work well, which is to help His kids. And just to the extent that I can live those things, my life is really good. And I've gotten on self-will binges in sobriety, where I got scared. I wanted got to fix my life. Oh, painful stuff. Painful stuff. But just to the extent that I live a surrendered life and I try to carry out the decision in step 3 and I try to help people, my life's good. So when Dr. Bob said this thing boiled down to trusting God, big piece of business, cleaning a house, to sweep away the things that block me from you and from God so that I can devote my life to a purpose greater than myself. Help God's kids. Mark Twain said, the 2 most important days in any human being's life is the day you were born and then the day you realized why. Thanks for listening. Woo!